Well, hey, howdy, hey, friends. Scott here, and we're going to talk about caneberries, which include the blackberries, raspberries, and the dewberries, and then any hybrids and maybe a few others in there. For identification, the features common to the whole group would be thorny brambles. Many of these form big, wild, impassable brambles, and also they make a really good hedge against zombies. Just a pro tip for you there. The fruit are aggregate berries. That means that each of the little spheres on a blackberry or a raspberry is actually its own little fruit. They just all cluster together into this thing we call an aggregate berry. The leaves are compound. They're pinnately compound, or a feather-like compound pattern with 3 to 7 leaflets, and they're also the leaves are they're very serrated. Um, that's another good identifying feature. And there are many different varieties, especially if you include the tame cultivars. You can find many species throughout this genus, all of which are edible. Now let's try to identify some of the different groupings a little more closely, though. So the blackberries, I mean, usually you think about those as having black berries, and most of them do, but not always. The best way to differentiate these is that the core comes out with the fruit. So see in the picture, those are raspberries, and they're empty. The core didn't come out with the fruit. So that's how you can tell them apart from, say, a red blackberry or a black raspberry or any of those. And then with the raspberry, as I've just mentioned, the core stays on the stem. So when you pick those, they look like a thimble. Dewberries are one that not everybody knows. They don't grow as well. They're not as widespread as the others. They do grow around me, and I'm kind of partial to them. They seem to fruit a little earlier in the spring than the others. But dewberries grow along the ground. They're more of a vine than they are a cane, and the thorns tend to be more like bristly, pokey hairs. Although they do have some good thorns in there too. The thorns on all of these, they can be straight, they can be slightly recurved. Uh, they're not unlike a rose thorn. But yeah, they're really easy to identify. Even if you aren't sure if you have a blackberry, a raspberry, a dewberry, a loganberry, it doesn't matter for practical purposes. Just taste it, and you're not going to poison yourself. Taste it and see what this particular one tastes like to see if you want to eat it or want to add some sugar to it or eat it raw. There there are some that I've been trying to find. I know that they have escaped into the wild around here. It's a type of raspberry called a wineberry, and I really want to find it. They look really cool. Okay, let's talk about environment. The caneberries like full sun, and you can find them out in fields, especially pastures that aren't well maintained, or at the edges of fields. They try to creep in wherever they can. They're very easy to transplant. If you wanted to take a wild blackberry bush that you like the taste of, you can dig up part of the root with a little bit of stem, put it in your yard, and it will take. They're very hardy. Now, getting rid of them might be a trick, but just getting them in there is not hard. They like somewhere in the middle ground between wet and dry, so they don't like extreme drought, and they don't like to just sit in a bog. But you can find these things just across most of the world. I don't think they care for the tropics too much. Raspberries like a little cooler weather. They don't like it when it gets warm either. Um, I'm I'm getting pretty close to the border of where raspberries stop. I never encounter wild raspberries right where I live, but if I go just a little bit north, I'll find raspberries. So I feel like I'm kind of on the border here in my Zone 7 in Arkansas, right at the uh, right at the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. As for food, well, you can find them in various colors, especially with those cultivars. You can, red, purple. You can find black, yellow. You might be able to find blue, and there are even white ones. And white berries are one of the things that you normally want to stay away from. But you're not going to find white berries in the wild unless it was some kind of strange mutation. And if you do find them in the wild, that might give you pause just because that's very unusual. But many different colors, all of which are edible, and they really don't have any dangerous lookalikes. They look a little bit like mulberries, but mulberries grow as a tree and they don't have thorns and the leaves are different. So, as long as you have found the fruit, you know you've got something. You know you've got this. Aggregate fruit, thorny vine. Nothing is really going to confuse you here. But most people know about the food value. Let's talk about the medicinal value. Not everyone knows how to use these as a medicine. So first, let's specifically talk about red raspberry. With this species, and I would presume that the other raspberries could be used similarly, I would also expect that most of the Rubus genus has, at least a fair degree of carryover as far as this is concerned. But this is the one that everyone always talks about. This is the one that has all of the, tradition and folk uses to back it up. But with with red raspberry, we use the leaf and the fruit, and they have a few different properties. They're astringent. It's a very safe and gentle astringent. It's good for kids, little kids. They can handle it. It can be used for diarrhea in little kids. It's a good one for little kids for diarrhea. Also, the astringent properties carry over to any of the species. It's really the tonic and the other that are specific to red raspberry. But if you have blackberry bushes, or brambles, I mean, or if you have dewberries, you can use those for the astringent properties as well. You can use it topically for burns and any kind of skin condition where you have like a seeping, weeping, oozing, or bleeding. And they can be used as a gargle for bleeding gums or inflamed gums. And it really won't irritate the tissue. It just gently dries it, gently tones it, and kind of pulls the tissue together. It's a tonic, meaning that it just supports normal function in general. That's always good. And then a parturient. This is a term that I don't use this term a whole lot. Basically, it just means it's something that has to do with pregnancy. That's what the word means. And this has a long tradition of being used during pregnancies for strengthening and toning the uterus, and for strengthening contractions and reducing hemorrhage, during labor. That would be one of its astringent properties, is for the bleeding. As far as dosing goes, if you want to use a tincture, you would use just the basic 40 to 50% alcohol content, and 2 to 4 dropperfuls would be appropriate, using it, say, 3 times a day or so. Your results may vary. Feel free to lower that, and it's a pretty safe one, so you could probably take more, but before you do that, you should probably consult with a trained herbalist or some trusted medical person who knows about herbs, just to be on the safe side. Although I wouldn't expect, there to be much danger. This is a pretty safe plant. If you want to use it as an infusion, you can use 2 teaspoons of the dry herb, and usually that's with 1 cup of boiling water poured over them, although the amount of water is not really important. It's the amount of the herb that's the real important part. And then let that infuse for, about 10 minutes or until it's cool enough to drink, and then you can drink that as much as you want. Now, about all of the other species, especially the blackberry, but really any of the others, we can use the root bark and the skin from the rhizome, so the underground parts, and these have these same astringent properties. Presumably the red raspberry root would also have the same properties, but I don't want to dig up a raspberry and kill it. I want to eat the raspberries, so I haven't tested that out. But they're astringent, as with the raspberry leaf. Standard 40 to 50% alcohol for a tincture, 2 to 5 dropperfuls 3 times a day, help to dry and tone up those tissues. If you want to make a decoction, and because this is a root, so infusion is not usually strong enough to pull out the medicinal components, but you can make a decoction with 1 to 2 grams. Get a little scale. Get 1 to 2 grams of the dried herb with a cup of water, and you want to bring that to a boil, and then reduce it down to a simmer. Let it simmer for 10 minutes, and that will allow it to decoct, or to pull out the astringent properties. And then you can drink that about 3 times a day to help if it's something you need to drink. You could use it as a wash, or as we've talked, as with the skin things. You don't have to drink it for the skin things. You can put it in a spray bottle and spray it on there. That's a very gentle way. If you have a very irritated section of skin that you can't even touch it, a spray is a really, really gentle way to get it on there. But you could pour it over there. You could soak like a wash rag in the decoction as soon as it's cooled off. If it's very gentle skin, you may not want to put scalding boiling water on there. That's generally ill-advised. But you can soak a rag or a washcloth in there and then set that on there gently and let the skin soak into it, or soak it into the skin. And that you could, it doesn't matter how many times a day you want to do that. Just if it's something that you want to drink, it's safe for diarrhea or for an internal bleeding condition, about 3 times a day would be good. But again, these are really safe plants. If you wanted to do it more than that, I would still say that you should probably talk to an herbalist that you trust, somebody that knows your own personal condition. But I wouldn't anticipate them, scaring you away from it. And there are no reported side effects or drug interactions with any of the species in this genus. So, as I say, it's a really safe plant. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will have another one out tomorrow. Until next time, keep your eyes out for plants and zombies.